Hey, leaders, welcome back to session 6 of Embracing Your Kingdom Platform, How to Become a Leader That's Easy to Follow. I'm Shane Stacy,
And I'm Dave Rhodes.
and we've been on a great journey together thus far as we've been stepping into this big idea that Jesus calls disciples, but he sees leaders. And Dave, we've walked through a number of different, big
Yeah,
competencies thus far. We started with the idea in that leadership star around vision. What's that contextual call I'm extending to people in my relational sphere of influence that led us right into voice? Who are those people in my relational sphere of influence? Who are those persons of peace that are responding to my voice? And in the last session, we talked about vocabulary. What is it that we're passing on? What are those tools and rhythms or processes that we're passing on? What's the content that we're carrying in from the Lord that we're passing on to others, helping them develop into the people that God has designed them to become as well? And so, Dave, with that, we're going to be moving into Voyage today. And as we do that, I want to just name maybe a quote here from Tom Landry, the great Dallas Cowboys football coach. Right? He
yeah,
defined coaching this way. He said, "Coaching's getting grown men and women to do what they don't want to do so that they become who they've always wanted to
I love
be."
that.
I love
I
that,
love
right? I mean, we could say it this way: leadership is getting people to go where they don't want to go so that they can get where they have always wanted to be. And here in session 6, as we step into Voyage, that's what we're going to really lean into. Every leadership journey that you and I have been on and that any other person's been on has some familiar patterns to it, right? I mean, it's got a pattern
it. Yeah,
that we see in the life of Jesus. We see Jesus taking his disciples through, but we actually experience it in everyday life. And what I love is a number of us, as we actually walk through this, we're going to be like, wait, I've done that before. I've actually done that before. So Dave,
yeah,
we're going to jump right into a tool today. Hey, and so kick us off into the journey.
yeah. Part of good leadership is anticipating the journey ahead and not being surprised when you walk it. And so that's what Voyage is really all about. It's about saying, hey, when I'm leading people, I am anticipating the journey that we're going to be on. And every journey is going to walk this same pattern. We see it in the life of Jesus and the way that he does work with his disciples. And we see it in our own lives as well. And we're going to use a matrix that, again, on the vertical axis, we use the idea of confidence. So it's high confidence at the top and low confidence at the bottom. That's the person that you're leading. How confident are they? And then on the vertical axis is about competence. How competent? High competence over on the right, low competence on the left. And so we'd say that every journey that we're going to take people on, just like the quadrants here, has 4 stages that we'll talk about. Discipleship stages. We'll call it D1, D2, D3, D4, these 4 stages of discipleship. And then beside that, we'll talk about the leading posture, L1, L2, L3, L4, that we need to take to help people along the journey. So let's start with the discipleship process. And this is any time that you are leading people and developing people, they're going to go on this journey, which whatever competence they're trying to learn, whether it's riding a bike, driving a car, or living like Jesus, this journey is going to emerge. So let's start with the first stage. We call it D1. And in the matrix, this is where someone's highly confident, but not very competent. We call this stage unconscious incompetence. It's where you don't know what you don't know. Let's think about this in driving a car. When I've got teenagers that I'm trying to teach to drive a car or train to drive a car right now. They've seen it for many years, right in the back seat. It looks easy. Dad's making it look easy. They've watched it on movies, but they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
They're unconsciously incompetent. They're highly confident, but not very competent. They're highly enthusiastic, but they don't have much experience. D2 is what they'll eventually move into once they actually start trying to learn. And this is what we call conscious incompetence. It's that moment where you realize, oh my goodness, this car's bigger than I thought it was. People are coming at me faster. I could really do some damage. I had one buddy who the first day he got his license, he pulled his dad's car out of the garage and backed it into his mom's car. He wrecked both family cars on the first day he got his license. That's a move into conscious incompetence, because now all of a sudden you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm never going to learn how to do this. And in D2, here's the experience for the disciple. And this can, if you haven't thought about this before, you know it's an experience. And as a leader, it'll surprise you and you start to think you're doing something wrong. Because here's what happens in D2. The people that you're leading, their confidence drops to meet their competence.
Everything changes, doesn't it?
Yeah. Their enthusiasm drops to meet their experience.
I thought this was going to be easy.
Yeah.
It was going to be easy.
Right. And what this means is in D2, people go into what we call the D2 pit.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dave, I mean, when you're in the pit, we've all been there, right?
Right.
Like we've all been there. When you're in the pit, it feels like, man, I just want to go back to Egypt. Like, can I just go back to, into D1, right? But what's actually really happening in the pit?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you said, you want a leader who'll take you back to Egypt. And, you see the Israelites here in the wilderness, they get out there, they're like, hey, Moses, you made promises that don't feel like they're being delivered on right now. This feels like anything like the promised land.
This journey is not what we thought it was going to be.
Yeah, they want to stone Moses and go back to Egypt.
Right.
But here's the deal. The pit that people are in is actually a gold mine. And everything that they're going to need to become who God's making them to be at the end of the process is in that mine. And so instead of rescuing people, this is our tendency. Our tendency when people get to D2 is to take them back to D1 and just get them excited again. To take them back to D1 and just get them. That's what they want. And if we're not careful, it's what we'll do. But instead, on the voyage, here's what we want to do. We want to help them harvest out of that gold mine all the incredible gold that is there. And then we want to help them build a ladder, repeat the vision. Hey, this is part of the journey to getting to where we want to get to. And grace, recognizing that in these moments, stuff's going to come out of them that I should expect as a leader and not be surprised at and not be offended by. Now, again, I learned this much more as a soccer coach than I did in seminary. When I'm training my guys on how to play soccer, what I don't do is just roll the balls out and ask them what they want to do. No, I'm training them, and I know that I'm going to try and get them into D2. And when I get them into D2 in practice, they're going to start complaining. In fact, I knew as a soccer coach, we were practicing if my players were complaining.
Right.
But all of a sudden, when we're leading people, especially in the Jesus stuff, we start to think if all of a sudden they're in too much pain or, they're complaining that we're doing something wrong. Well, if you have a customer service mentality, you will start to think you're doing something wrong because customer service is about getting people out of pain as quickly as possible. But a coaching mentality says, no, I know it's in this pain, that I'm not trying to just be masochistic and keep people in pain, but I know it's in this pain that God is broadening their shoulders, that God is bringing things out of them, and that this is actually where the training occurs. So instead of relieving the pain, I press into the pain with them in time, vision, and grace. And as we do this, their shoulders begin to broaden.
And as you said, Dave, this is so key for us as a leader, as we're thinking about multiplication in the long run. If you're an intuitive leader, I just know how to do stuff, right? Like there's just things that are natural to us. These things that you're learning, people are learning, as you said, in the pit, in this gold mine, are actually going to enable them not only to get through it, but actually turn around and be able to lead people better through it in the future. And so if you've got a multiplication mindset, again, understanding what's happening in D2, and as you just said, how to help people kind of raise up with fresh grace, time, and vision to move through it and really see the gold here, it's going to not only help them in the future, but it's actually going to help the people that they help in the future as well.
Right. Yeah. And so what we have to do as leaders is normalize that this is a normal part of the journey.
Yeah.
It's not, they may be shocked by it, but we're not shocked by it.
Right.
They may want to go back, but we're not going back. And we are going to give them access to our life and time and vision and grace to help lead them through it. Well, as you do that, eventually people go through the dip and they start to move to what we call D3. And D3 is conscious competence. Here, the experience is that people's confidence start to rise as their competence rise. Their enthusiasm begins to be regained as their experience begins to match up with it. So go back to the idea of driving a car. D3 is you're now on the road because you're coming through the pit and you're driving, but you're thinking about driving the whole time you're doing it. You got the mental checklist in your mind. So your hands are on 10 and 2. You're looking in your mirrors, every, 50 yards or so. You're got your blinker on. You can drive, but you got to think about it the whole time you're doing it. And this is conscious competence. And then finally, D4, we call unconscious competence. And this is where you're doing stuff and you don't have to think about it anymore. Probably many of you got to wherever you were going today, driving your car. And if you think about how you got there, you'll scare yourself.
Right? Yeah.
Right. You're like, because you're doing so many other things while you're driving because you've become unconsciously competent now at driving a car. And here's the experience. Your confidence has been regained, but now you have competence to go along with it. You're enthusiastic again, but now you have the experience to go along with it. Every leadership journey that you are discipling people on will go through this dip. Everyone. And so as leaders, we've got to expect this dip. In fact, we've got to anticipate it, and we've got to lead people through it. So when we go back to each stage, we want to now talk about the leadership posture that you see in Jesus. And we're going to go to the Gospels here. We're going to see the way Jesus does this with the people that we're leading. So at D1, when people are unconsciously incompetent, the leadership posture that we want to have with people is one that we call I do, you watch. And you see this at the beginning of Jesus's ministry. Jesus is doing the ministry. The disciples are there. They're highly enthused. They're part of the ministry with the it guy. They get to have a front row seat to all that Jesus is doing. And Jesus is doing the ministry and they watch. But eventually Jesus drives his disciples into D2. About John 6, where there's 5,000 people plus women and children that are gathered, and the disciples want to be helpful. They're saying, hey, Jesus, in the conference at 5:00, because then everyone can go to their own place and get dinner. And Jesus does something that feels kind of strange. He looks at his disciples and he says, you give them something to eat.
Right.
It feels almost rude, like that he would do that.
What are you knuckleheads been doing here the whole time?
Right. And now the disciples are totally overwhelmed. They're in conscious incompetence. We've got one kid who's got 5 loaves and 2 fish. We got 20,000 people. What are we supposed to do? Well, here Jesus changes his leadership posture. It's no longer I do, you watch. It's I do, you help. So he says, all right, you guys get them seated in 50s and 100s. Give me the bread that you've collected and the fish. I'll break the bread and the fish. You guys help me pass it out. So Jesus does the breaking of the bread. They help him pass it out. They collect the leftovers at the end. It's a different posture now. I'm doing it, and you're helping me do it. D3, the experience of conscious competence, is one in which now we shift the posture as a leader. So we see Jesus doing this. John chapter 6, he's beginning to involve the disciples in his ministry. But in Luke chapter 9 and Luke chapter 10, he starts to send out the 12. He starts to send out the 72. They start to do the work of ministry because but he gives them instructions on what to do. They got a playbook of the person of peace strategy we talked about in an earlier session. They've got things to do, but they can do it as long as they think about it. And so the new posture here is you do and I help. So now he's sending them out to do the ministry. They're taking ownership of it, and he's coming alongside of them to help them. If you get stuck, I'll be there to help you. This is exactly what happens in Mark chapter 9. Jesus is up on the Mount of Transfiguration with Peter, James, and John. The disciples, the rest of them are down doing the work of ministry, but there's one kid that has a demon they can't get out. And so Jesus goes down. He delivers the boy from the demon, and then he immediately calls his disciples to him and gives them the interpretive playbook. He says, this kind can only come out by prayer and fasting, which is exactly what Jesus has been doing on the top of the mountain. So he's helping them, but as he helps them, he's giving them the playbook so that they can continue to grow in their competence.
And Dave, that's a perfect example of what you spoke about earlier, giving people in our last session, we give people what they need when they need it.
Right.
They didn't, they've seen Jesus do that before. But they've not encountered that before. It would have been like the driver's ed part of leading my daughter through, right? The classroom side of things, it would have been in one ear and out the other. but suddenly
Yeah.
now they were in it and they needed to learn a new thing. And Jesus is now stepping in saying, okay, now they're ready for this aspect of it as well.
Eventually, they get to D4. And now this is the whole book of Acts. I mean, Peter is walking by someone and his shadow heals them. That's unconscious competence, right? And the new posture here is you do. And instead of I watch, I always say I cheer. I cheer. And so this is now they have built the competence, and now they're doing it. They don't have to think about it anymore. Well, with every competency that we're training people in, they go through the dip. So it's not just one journey through it. It's 100 different journeys through the dip that we're helping people through, and we're constantly thinking as leaders about how we're posturing ourselves with people in a way that leads them through the dip. And so the hard part here, Shane, as a leader, is recognizing what I need to do to move people from D1 to D2 to D3, D4. Again, I learned this as a soccer coach, not as a seminary student. Seminary taught me to teach and preach, and I'm really thankful for it. I love that. It didn't teach me how to train, but every training process has got to move through this. The way to move people from D1 to D2 is you have to introduce the possibility of failure. This is what most small groups don't do. You get together and you talk and you discuss, but there's never try anything. There's never, hey, live it out and come back and tell us how it goes.
Right. No accountability to that.
You have to introduce the possibility of failure. And, again, let's think football. Why does Nick Saban put someone, like Clemson on the first game of the season? Why does he do that? Because he wants in spring practice to get his players into D2. We might lose our first game. He wants to get them in the D2 as quickly as possible. So because he knows so much happens in D2. So he's going to introduce the possibility of failure. They don't have to fail, but you got to introduce the possibility of failure. Well, to turn the corner from D2 to D3, you've got to reintroduce the possibility of success. So we're going to put Fresno State as the second game because I don't want my guys to get used to failing. There's going to be necessary failure that happens, but now I want to reintroduce the possibility of success, which means breaking things down and giving them little things that they can do, they can succeed in, that all of a sudden become big wins. Then finally, from D3 to D4, I've got to create the repeated pattern of success so they get used to succeeding. So now all of a sudden, we're not just having a good year, but we've built a great program because we've codified our process of success that now we can lead players through all the time and they get used to winning at those kinds of things. And then finally, from D4 on, this is the move from disciple leader. Now it's succession. Now I start to vacate so that they can step in to leading and they start helping others go through similar journeys that they've been through. So lots that we could talk about here with this tool, Shane. We just want to open it up here to let people know this is the voyage. You're always taking people through the dip. We should expect it. We should anticipate it. And what we don't want to do is bait and switch people when we start leading them. We don't want to act like they're going to go straight from D1 to D4.
Right.
We've got in our language and in our vision casting and as we anticipate the voyage to help them know, hey, this might be harder, but better than you've ever thought it would be. And we're going to walk with you through it.
It's great, Dave. And here's the big thought, and we had to make it big, right? Big thought is you can't really lead people without taking them through the dip. I'll say it again, you can't really lead people without taking them through the dip. And we tend to think that leading is just inspiring people to want to do something. But leading is so much more than that, right? We confuse leading with performing. And leadership is delivering. But leadership is also developing. All right, it includes inspiring, but it's more than that. It truly is leading people through the dip to get them to the other side, but not just get them to the other side, but to help them become something they weren't before, to help them truly improve. It really is about getting under people in order to be able to lift them up. And here's the really good news. You already know how to do this. Dave and I, as we're in rooms with lots of different people, we're working with lots of different leaders, we love to walk them through a little experiment. And I want to walk you through that experiment right now. If you have the handout there, you're going to see 4 questions. And feel free to even pause the video if you want. I want you just to write down. I want you to really give some thought to this for a moment. And here's the first question I want you to think about. When was a time that you were going through the dip, right? Maybe you were, when was a time when you were learning something new? It could be, learning a new language. Right now I'm trying to learn Italian, and I'll tell you what, I am in the dip. Maybe it was learning to ride a bike, or maybe it was, learning to play an instrument, or learning to water ski, or maybe it was, do plumbing in your home, and you quickly found out that you were in the dip and you didn't know what you didn't know, sort of thing. Maybe it was, again, learning to hear the voice of God, or learning to preach, or whatever it might be. But when was there a time when you were trying to learn something new and you found yourself in the dip? What was it that you were trying to learn to do? Now, here's the second question. When you got into the dip, how did you feel? I mean, how did it feel when you were in the dip? And here's the third question. What did you need from someone else when you were in the dip? What did you need from someone else when you were in the dip? And then the fourth question is, what are you thankful for now on this side of the dip? Now that you're through it, now that you're in that place of unconscious competence, what are you thankful for now? And what is so fun is, no matter how many times Dave and I have done this with people, every room that we're in, it's like a carbon copy. That you would think that, like, from room to room, people were somehow looking onto other people's papers, because these are the kind of things we hear. No matter what it is that they were learning, what we end up hearing when they were in D2 is, how did it feel to be in the dip? And we hear things like, it felt overwhelming. Like, I felt anxious. I felt like I was never going to get through it, or I felt like I can't do this, or I felt like I needed to give up. I felt like a failure. I felt foolish, right? Some people I felt angry, or whatever it might be. And here's the thing. It's normal. That's what we want. That's what we want you to hear. It's normal. The dip is normal, and this is the way that people learn. And so don't freak out when people that you're leading are in the dip. It's a normal thing. You're not doing something wrong that they're feeling the way that they're feeling. It's actually that you're probably doing something right. The key then is to stick with them, to continue to help them actually move through the dip, not go back to D1. And so then we ask people again, like, what did you need? And again, it's just amazing to hear these lists. They needed practice, they needed encouragement. They needed a model. They needed a partner. They needed someone to do it with them. They needed a coach. They needed someone who would provide feedback for them. They needed more time. They just needed more time. They needed a step-by-step process instead of trying to jump from here to there. I love one person who said, and I love it, they said, I needed to unlearn some things. And boy, that's true too, isn't it? Sometimes we need to unlearn those things. And then when we get to that last question, it's always so fun when you're asking people, and maybe it's things that you wrote down as well. What were you thankful for on this side of the dip? And you hear people say, I'm thankful that I pushed through. I was so thankful for the support that was given to me. I'm thankful that I can do this now. And my life is actually different now because I can do this. Or I'm thankful because that was a stepping stone to something I didn't even realize that I would need now for what I'm doing now. All right. Or I'm so thankful I didn't give up. Or it was just a pivotal time in my life.
Mm-hmm. If you'll ask yourself, what did I feel and what do I need? Then you can press in this journey as a leader, because you know what people need. And when people start maybe complaining, or they start getting frustrated or angry, you say, you don't have to be, caught off guard by that. Now you know what to give them when they're feeling that way.
And Dave, this is key too. One of the things that naming, walking backwards as a leader, walking backwards when you learn whatever you're passing on, right, to walk backwards and to remember you were in the D2 at some point. But again, our curse of knowledge and our experience, sometimes, maybe that was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and we need to slow down for a minute and remember, oh yeah, and who was it? What was it? We were probably already mined out the gold to get to where we are today. If we'll go back and codify those things, it'll help
Yeah.
us be able to lead more of those people that we're with right now go, this is what they need next. I
Yeah. I
remember it
mean,
was so-and-so came alongside of me.
so many times as leaders, we live at D4 while the people we're leading lead at D2.
Yeah.
And that gap gets wider rather than closer.
Yeah.
And so what we have to do as leaders when we're at D4 and they're at D3, we have to go back, like you're saying, we have to go back and we have to remember how we learned how to do something. When I'm teaching my daughter right now how to drive a car, I've forgotten how I learned to drive a car. So I have to go back. I forgot. I got to teach. I got to train her on how to put the key in the ignition. I haven't thought about that, in years. I got to think about, all the things that I never think about anymore. I got to go back and say, how did I learn this? And I've got to give her access to ask me questions so I can remember how I've learned those things. And I'm going to codify that process so that when we get in the car, she's now got a mental checklist. So the skill for me as a leader is to mine back my unconscious competence to conscious competence so that people who are consciously incompetent can join me in that. So as they're going into the dip, I'm now mining back from D4 to D3 to meet them so that I can walk them through it.
Absolutely. And we're naming a lot of things out in life on purpose, but this is true of learning how to hear the voice of God. This is true of, Dave, we train people in hospitality.
Right.
One of the
Yeah.
marks of a follower of Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Is
It's true when you're
hospitality.
learning how to manage your budget, get out of financial crisis. I mean,
Right. So many things.
Every competency that we're trying to help people in as disciples is going to go through this dip.
That's great. That's great. Well, Dave, huge. Wrap us up here on this session, and then we'll tee off into what'll be next.
Yeah. So again, on the voyage part, the most important piece is to normalize the dip. I know it's a lot today. You want to rewatch this session over and over again as a leader, and you're going to need to make these moves as you are leading people. But remember, it's already in you. It's already in you. You know what this feels like. Now we just need to normalize it in our journeys when we're leading people, and we need to forecast it for them so that when they experience it, they're not as caught off guard as they normally are. This is part of the process. If you're training someone, you say, you know what, I'm going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed, but you're going to experience, you're going to grow in to who you've always wanted to be. Remember that Tom Landry quote, coaching is getting grown men or women to do what they don't want to do so they can become who they've always wanted to be. So the voyage piece here is about normalizing the dip, recognizing that life is a series of these dips and discipleship is a series of these dips. And as much as you're leading people through it on your own discipleship journey, you're going through it. And you might feel that way now, even in this course. We're giving you 5 things, and now all of a sudden you're saying, oh my gosh, I got the vision maybe, and I got the voice, but now we talk about vocabulary and voyage. You're in D2 maybe, even in this process here. It's totally okay. It's totally okay. It's totally normal. Mm-hmm. This is normal. It's the way everyone learns how to do everything. So even if you're in D2 in your own leadership right now, just recognize that is part of the process. Let's normalize it. Let's lead people through it, because when we do, we don't just get people to where they want to get to. We start developing in them who they need to be when they get there.
It's huge.
So leadership is both development and delivery. Mm-hmm. It's about getting them to progress, but it's also a process that develops them as they're on the journey. So this is the voyage. In our next session, we're going to finish everything up and talk about vehicle. Now we can go back and talk about vehicle.
Toyota?
Yeah. Now we need the Toyota. How are we going to get there? How are we going to take this journey? That's what the next session is all about. So we look forward to seeing you in our final session of Embracing Your Kingdom Platform. We're going to talk about vehicle, and we're going to bring it all together and give you a worksheet as a leader that you can walk through over and over again so that you become a leader that's easy to follow.
See you in the next session.